Hello, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes, yes, we can hear you.
We're going to start shortly. Just enjoy our beautiful altar in the meantime. Beautiful. Yes, you need to put the order. And if you look at our class sizes from 2008, 2008, oh yeah. So for instance, okay, the monk will be here next week. He's 5 years ahead of me. And every year every year your class will be a little smaller. My class has 45 monks in it only. His class still has like 110. When you're like in the land, please say so my class, my starting class, I've never had more than 100 monks. That was the most I had. And there are some classes above me that had over 300 monks. But just the number of monks that are able to get into India is less because the border is so much more secure now. And then on top of that, more Tibetans are choosing to go to university and or to go to the West, things like that. Or even though they aren't migrating, are actually going to university and like choosing university instead of the monks. You know, like the other problem is the monks will come. Like, you know, all the monks I live with are from Arunachal Pradesh. Well, they're not from Tibet. The ones I live with in my house, the 30 of them that I live with, are from they're all Bengal. And there are quite a number of them that will come from monastery. So they'll go through grade 10 because school is better for monastery than it is some of the ones they have access to at home. And then they leave and go to university and they just grow. You know, so it's not uncommon, let's say. So, you know, I think that happened in the Theravada center also. They come here and they I'm noting down my where I do that. There was something about Tibet being so cut off from the rest of the world that now that it's not cut off, and now that they have access. Would you all, as we are waiting, would you all like to see our center and the altar?
Yeah. Okay.
All right.
Yes, yes.
We're waiting
Thank
for
you.
people to join. We're waiting for people here to come. So I'm just going to show you. Behind me here is the main altar,
You want the bag?
the Shakyamuni Buddha altar. Can you see?
Yes. Beautiful.
So this is the first statue Choe Khor Sum Ling ever got. And this is the Shakyamuni Buddha statue. Here you have Arya Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva of compassion. And this is Arya Manjushri, the Bodhisattva of wisdom. And here we have the teacher's throne. This is throne that we have kept for our teachers to, when they come, they sit. So we have here His Holiness, the 14th Dalai Lama's photo, Lama Zopa Rinpoche, and all of our teachers. On top here, you see the statue, the photograph of the statue. Can you see? I don't know if you can see.
Yeah.
Of the Mahabodhi Stupa.
Yes.
Here you have, let me pin this so I also can see what I'm showing you. This is the altar for the 21 Taras. All the 21 Taras, the emanations of the female Buddha, are here. And here we have the statues of Lama Tsongkhapa and his two students. And here we have the Buddha Maitreya, the next Buddha coming into the world. And the orange ones that you see behind are all the Buddhist teachings, Kagyu and Tengyur scripts. And here we have the statue of Guru Padmasambhava. And our walls are decked with thankas. This is a thanka here of Medicine Buddha. I'm going to tilt the screen a little to show you this. This is the Medicine Buddha mandala in our center, which is
on the roof, on the ceiling.
Beautiful.
Yeah. And Venerable is here. I think we're going to start shortly. So,
Thank you so much.
no problem. We'll continue this again later.
Hello, friends. Thank you for joining us today. So we're continuing our Sunday series, Practical Buddhism for Everyday Life. And let's just take a moment to find some stillness. Whatever activities we've been up to this morning, dealing with family, friends, traffic, whatever it took for us to get here, let's put that all aside and let our awareness settle. For those of you online, allow yourself to create a sacred space as if you were in the temple in the Gompa. And now, as we've settled into our space, let's set a very strong motivation. The reason we have joined together this morning to study the Dharma, to study the teachings of the Buddha, is not simply for our own benefit, though there will be benefit to our mind, to our lives. But the real goal is to be able to be of benefit to others. We recognize that the best way we can serve others is by improving our own minds, developing our own wisdom and our own compassion. And through that, we can then be of greater service to other sentient beings. So we set as our primary motivation the wish to be of service to others. So let that be the primary intention behind your study and your practice. So we'll begin this morning by doing a few prayers to make sure we have that motivation strongly fixed in our minds. And so in our gold book, we'll start on page 32, 34. And we'll do the first prayer, Refuge and Bodhicitta. We'll do in Tibetan 3 times and once in English. And then we'll continue with the other prayers in English. We do, especially on our Sunday mornings, it's our kind of introductory level class, so we don't do many prayers. A lot of the centers I've gone to in the past, we spend 25, 30 minutes at every session doing prayers before the teachings. And so I often think we should do more prayers, but it's a hard balance to try to find if the prayers are useful for people, especially new people. So I like to start with at least some, because the prayers are very helpful for our mind, right? Sometimes whatever these prayers are, the prayers aren't just words, right? The point of engaging in prayer is to help change your mind. And so whatever the topic is of the prayer, you are trying to make that inseparable from your mind. So we start with generating a mind of refuge, recognizing that the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha are the sources of safety from samsara. That's how we will be free from our suffering. And then developing the mind of bodhicitta, that our practice may be for the benefit of others, right? And then we have this prayer for the 4 immeasurable thoughts. So a prayer to generate immeasurable love, immeasurable compassion, immeasurable joy, and immeasurable equanimity. And then we have a 7-limb prayer that includes all of the aspects of generating virtue and eliminating negativities, right? So a complete practice. So let's start with those. Sangye Chudan Soki Chonam La Chancho Bardo Dagni Kapsu Shi Dagi Rinsogi Pesonam Gi Drola Penche Sange Dru Par Shok Sangye Chudan Soki Chonam La Chancho Bardo Dagni Kapsu Shi Dagi Rinsogi Pesonam Gi Drola Penche Sange Dru Par Shok Sange Chiram Soki Chonam La Chancho Pardu Dagni Kyapsu Chi Dagi Jinsogi Pe Sonam Gi Jola Pinche Sange Pardo. I go for refuge in time enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By my practice of giving and the other perfections, may I become a Buddha, benefit all sentient beings. May all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings be inseparable from the happiness that is free from suffering. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment for friends and hatred for enemies. May all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings be inseparable from the happiness that is free from suffering. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment for friends and hatred for enemies. May all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings be inseparable from the happiness that is free from suffering. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment for friends and hatred for enemies. Reverently I prostrate with my body, speech, and mind. I present clouds of every type of offering, actual and imagined. I declare all my negative actions accumulated since beginning this time, and rejoice in the merit of all holy and ordinary beings. Please remain unto the end of cyclic existence and turn the wheel of Dharma for living beings. I dedicate my own merits and those of all others to the great enlightenment. A mandala offering, we will offer first in Tibetan, then in English. So a mandala is a representation of the cosmos, of all that exists. And so when we make a mandala offering, we're offering all that exists to all the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. And we tend to offer mandala offering before teaching, both as a request for teaching and also as a request for blessing from all the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. So with that in mind, we offer this. Ni de ge ba di sa ge shi ge mi te wa joy ke Namandakshina This ground anointed with perfume, strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, the four continents, the sun, and the moon. I imagine this as a Buddha field and offer it. May all living beings enjoy this pure land. Idam Guru Ratna Mandala Kamyatayani. Let's finish our prayers this morning with praise to Shakyamuni Buddha, which is found on page 73. To the founder, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, To you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. To the founder, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme God of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings. To you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. To the founder, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme God of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings. To you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. When, O supreme amongst humans, you are born on this earth, you paced out 7 strides and then said, I am supreme in this world. To you who are wise then I prostrate. With pure bodies, form supremely pure, wisdom ocean like a golden mountain, fame that blazes in the 3 worlds, winner of the best, Lord, to you I prostrate. With the supreme signs, face like spotless moon, color like gold, to you I prostrate. Dust free like you, the 3 worlds are not, incomparably wise one, to you I prostrate. The Savior having great compassion, the Founder having all understanding, the field of merit with qualities like a vast ocean, to you, the one gone to thusness, I prostrate. The purity that frees one from attachment, the virtue that frees one from the lower realms, the one path, the sublime pure reality, to the Dharma that pacifies, I prostrate. Those who are liberated and who also show the path to liberation, the holy field qualified with realizations, who are devoted to the moral precepts, to you, the sublime community intending virtue, I prostrate. Homage to the Supreme Buddha, homage to the Dharma refuge, homage to the great Sangha, to all 3 ever devout homage, to all worthy of respect, bowing with bodies as many as all realms, atoms in all aspects. With supreme faith I pay homage. Do not commit any non-virtuous actions. Perform only perfect virtuous actions. Subdue your mind thoroughly. This is the teaching of the Buddha. A star, a visual aberration, a flame of a lamp, an illusion, a drop of dew or a bubble, a dream, a flash of lightning, a cloud. See, condition things as such. Through these merits may all sentient beings attain the rank of all seeing, subdue the foe of faults, and be delivered from samsara's ocean, perturbed by the waves of aging, sickness, and death. Great. Thank you. So, as I've been mentioning last week and this week, it is the month of Sakadawa, which is a holy month, the 4th month in the Tibetan lunar calendar. And the 15th of this month is a celebration of the Buddha's birth and his passing away into parinirvana, as well as his reaching enlightenment. We say it's all commemorated on the same day. And so for that reason, this whole month is a month that is especially powerful to engage and practice and study, because there's such a focused energy that so many students around the world are simultaneously engaging in practice and study that it creates a type of group energy, we say. The more esoteric reason, as we say, multiplies our merit, makes our merit more powerful. So because of that, I'm very happy we can be here together. We can be studying the Dharma during this month. There is also going to be a special puja on Sakadawa Duchen on the actual 15th of the Tibetan month, which is this upcoming Wednesday, which is the 11th of our month of June. So anyone that can come to that would be wonderful. It'd be led by Venerable Tenzin Gachik. So continuing what we've been talking about the last couple of weeks and kind of building off of it, well, let's start by saying that whenever we engage in studying a topic, it's useful to adopt 3 attitudes. I've talked about this a lot, but it's good to remind ourselves that whenever we're studying or whenever we're analyzing our own practice, there are 3 attitudes that are helpful for us to keep at the front of our minds. So the first one is an attitude of, let's say, the long view, right? That attitude is recognizing that Buddhahood is quite far away and our goal is a very distant goal. And so if we're expecting immediate results, then we're going to be disappointed, right? So the long view recognizes that as long as we are pointed in the right direction, then we're making incremental benefit. Then that is what we have to be aiming for. We never take our eyes off the prize, so to speak. We recognize that Buddhahood is our goal, so we can be a benefit to others. But we also do that while realizing it's not going to happen tomorrow. So we have this big picture goal. So we always try to keep the big picture in mind, or the long view. Then the second view is the expansive view. So in addition to having this big picture goal, expansive view is recognizing that what we need to study and practice has many different faces. There isn't one simple practice for all of us that can bring us to Buddhahood. So we need to find a balance of engaging in study and engaging in meditation and engaging in practice. And when we study more than one topic, because there are many different moving pieces, let's say. So that is the expansive view, recognizing that there are a lot of different pieces and not letting that overwhelm us, right? Recognizing that we're doing the best we can. So it's understandable when there are all these different moving pieces to not have a grasp of all of them, right, at the same time, because we're still new, we're still learning. That's perfectly acceptable, but recognize that we have to try to always be including as thorough a practice as we can. And then lastly, the kind of the maybe most important attitude, the one that works hand in hand with those first two, is to have a relaxed attitude or a relaxed view. If we're too tight, if we believe that we have to have immediate gain, immediate goals, then we're going to be disappointed, right? And so we should always be striving. We should always be working to better our own minds, right? And to make the lives of those around us better. But we need to do it in a way that doesn't cause us undue stress, that doesn't cause us undue expectations. So we have to have this relaxed attitude as well. And that works hand in hand with the long view and the expansive view. And if you ever meet any Tibetan and you seem even the slightest bit stressed out about anything, the first thing they're going to say to you is relax. Semtyo mache. Don't worry. Go slowly. You know, aramse is very similar. This idea of aramse is very, very similar to the Tibetan idea. Just relax. Go slowly. You know. So those three views, I think, I like bringing them up at the beginning of some of our sessions because it's important. We keep them in mind, right? And it's a good thing to remind yourself of when you're sitting down to practice, but also when you're going about your day and you feel overwhelmed by something and you say that, why is my practice, my spiritual practice isn't affecting my everyday life as much as I wanted to? I got so angry for no reason or whatever it may be. Remind yourself, this is a long-term practice. There are many different pieces and I have to be kind to myself and that I'm doing the best I can. And that means I'm going to fall down. But as long as I get back up and keep moving, then that is appropriate way to be, right? So in the last couple of weeks, we talked about the Bodhisattva vows, I think 2 weeks ago. And for those who are attending on Saturdays, we've been talking about karma and the 10 non-virtuous activities. And those are all ways of understanding how not to engage in harmful activities, right? But for those of us living in the world, we also want to know what positive things should we be doing. So what is the counterbalance? Not just to not engage in harmful activity and to have a mind that is avoiding non-virtue, but we should be developing active virtuous activity, right? And so part of the Bodhisattva vows, which we didn't talk about, is all of the branch vows. There are 46 branch vows. Those are mostly designed to help us ensure our practice of the 6 perfections is thorough and strong. So I wanted to talk today about the 6 perfections, or the 6 perfected activities of a bodhisattva that we're trying to embrace and embody in our life. Sorry, I should have mentioned before. So I'm going to try the same schedule I did last week, which is instead of having a break in the middle, which seems very disruptive for me at least, we'll have our session go all the way to 12:15 and we'll have our break at the end. And there'll be a meditation in there before the break. So we'll have some discussion, meditation, then more discussion and Q&A, and then we'll break at 12:15 instead of having a break in the middle, which feels really disruptive, at least for my style. It's disruptive a little bit. If our session was longer, then it's good to have a break. If you're going to have at least an hour or an hour and a half after the break. But if we only have 15 or 20 minutes, it's just hard to get back into the groove, you know? So we're going to try this, at least for my Sundays. We're going to try this for a little while and see if it works. So thinking of the six perfections, we have to first think of what are the preliminary minds that we should bring to our practice of the six perfections. Let's start with that. So the preliminary minds are, obviously, we want to start with bodhicitta. That's the most important, right? So bodhicitta is the mind that is intending to achieve perfect, complete enlightenment for the sake of other sentient beings. It's the mind that sees the suffering of others and says the best way I can be of benefit to them is by improving my own mind, and then actively wishing for that, right? And we should cultivate that bodhicitta in everything we do. An actual bodhisattva, they have bodhicitta that is effortless and it's continual all the time because they meditate it to such an extent that they don't have to put any effort. They're constantly have active minds that are working to benefit others. For us, we still have to create a fabricated type of bodhicitta. We have to put in effort, and that's fine because that's where we are. They often call the bodhicitta that you first develop is the bodhicitta that is similar to the bark of a sugarcane plant. And the reason they call it that is a sugarcane plant, the actual sweetness, the essence is in the center, right? That's where the flavor is. But the bark has some residual sweetness, right? The bark, if you were to taste it, due to its proximity to the actual sweetness, it has some taste of sugar, of sweetness. So our bodhicitta that we're able to develop comes about through much effort and in our meditation practice, but it has the taste of actual bodhicitta. So it's bodhicitta that is like the bark of a sugarcane plant, or they say the skin of a sugarcane plant. So that's what we have to cultivate now. And then as we become more familiar with it, it takes less and less effort, right? And it becomes more omnipresent in our lives. And I won't go too long about bodhicitta because that's a whole other series of talks, but bodhicitta, at least in the Tibetan view, is what makes our lives meaningful. Actually engaging in a life that's dedicated to helping others is what makes your life meaningful. And especially because bodhicitta doesn't just combine service, but it recognizes that in order to serve others, you have to help yourself as well. So it combines the two aims, the aims of self and other. The primary goal is always to benefit others, but it realizes that in order to do that, we have to work on ourselves. And it's one of the few practices that combines those two goals of self and others. And so it makes your life meaningful because it gives structure to how you serve and how you exist in the world, right? When you're able to make your life a one of service, then that is what we say is meaningful, and when you can do it with an open mind, it also creates peace and calmness in your mind and joy in your mind all the time, right? I also like to think of, and that way we often talk about bodhicitta as courageous and transformative. I like to think of it also as radical. If we look at contemporary society, how many people spend their energy working for others? And I'm sure we can think of some, right? But not many. That's not the average way people exist in the world. And the people that we can think of are going to be the exceptional people that we know, right? The average person is concerned about themselves, and then maybe sometimes about their family or their loved ones, some of the time, not even all the time, right? Maybe they're close friends, but they always have a small circle. And that's not their fault. That is what it needs to be in samsara, right? I'm not blaming anyone, but that is the way of the world right now. That's how worldly people's minds are, is focusing on themselves. And so what bodhicitta is doing is it's totally reversing that. And it's saying that far more important than cherishing yourself is cherishing others. That's a radical act. That's totally subverting societal expectations, right? And we look at Shakyamuni Buddha, and he also engaged in a radical act of giving up his whole worldly life to become an ascetic and to eventually achieve the state of Buddhahood that he did. He was going against everything that was expected of him at the time. And so that is an example that I think we need to follow, right? To engage in the study of the Dharma is a radical act. And that's a helpful way for me to see it. Maybe not everyone is as much of, a radical as I am. But for me, that's a helpful way of understanding that there is work involved in this. And it's work because what society is telling me is valuable is contrary to what my spiritual path is telling me is valuable. So all the signs I'm getting from the outside are focus on yourself. Buy this thing. It'll make you happy. Do this thing. Take care of your own needs first. Don't worry about others. They'll take care of themselves, right? You deserve all these good things. Therefore, exploit them. Take them for yourself. That's what society tells us all the time, right? To not do that
it takes courage and it takes effort.
Mentioned that the task of the Bodhisattva or the mission of the Bodhisattva is to serve others. Now, what form does this service essentially take? Is it just preaching the Dharma, or is it also being socially engaged by taking up social issues, for example, maybe ecological, climate crisis, for example, or addressing social inequalities or gender injustice? I mean, why the social issues which social activists take up?
Yeah.
So can a Bodhisattva also be a social activist in that sense, or is his task of serving others limited only to preaching the Dharma?
No, it depends on the time and place, right? So we look throughout history, the role that the Bodhisattva is going to play in society is going to be different. So 100%, they should be doing external work as well, if the time and place is appropriate for it. So all the things you mentioned, working for social justice, ecological issues, any of these things are things that a Bodhisattva should be taking up if it's going to be benefiting sentient beings. Now, the difficulty for us who are working that path is to try to do that without anger, without minds that are motivated to harm those that are creating injustice, right? Which is very easy to fall into. When you see active injustice, instead of just wanting to remove the injustice and benefit the people that are suffering, you also want to punish and harm the people that are creating it. So that's not a helpful attitude, right? So our job as people engaging in this spiritual path is to try to find that justice, find that support, and not harm others in the process. So it can be difficult with contemporary rhetoric, but definitely Bodhisattvas and people that are pursuing the Bodhisattva ideal should be doing that. And in fact, I was at a teaching maybe a decade ago where it was at Gyume Monastery, and His Holiness Dalai Lama was teaching, and it was almost entirely monks at this teaching. And he criticized the monks. And he said, you say you're practicing for the benefit of all sentient beings, but I look at my Christian brothers and sisters who have soup kitchens and homeless shelters, and they're doing these things. And you say, well, that's worldly benefit. I'm focused on spiritual benefit. That's an excuse. And that's laziness. And that, yes, it's true that worldly benefit is temporary. Worldly benefit like that isn't going to lead someone out of samsara. It's giving them very temporary benefit. But if you have the means to offer that temporary benefit, you should be doing that, while simultaneously working on spiritual benefit and freedom from samsara. So it's your responsibility to see what opportunities are available to you and what is within your means. Not everyone can engage in that same type of thing, right? Not everyone has the means or both emotional or just, physical means to engage in that kind of work. But if you do, it's your responsibility as Bodhisattva to do the best you can. For some people, that means going to a cave and meditating. And that is the way they serve others, by developing their mind more intensely in this life. That is the type of service that some people are called to do. But others are called to do service, like active service in the world. So these are all paths of Bodhisattvas. It's our responsibility as students to see what works for us. The Buddha said that the practice of the Dharma, there's three general types of students. There are students who's, due to their own karmic imprints, are going to practice the Dharma primarily through study, those who are going to practice primarily through meditation, and those who are going to practice primarily through service. And most of us have some combination of those three buckets, right? But there are some people that are going to be very heavy in one bucket versus the other. But we need to try to balance all those three of study, meditation, and service as part of us engaging in a spiritual path. So bodhicitta is going to be the underlining, like the foundation for all of our practice. But then we get to the 6 paramitas, the 6 perfections. So the term paramita in Sanskrit, it actually comes from the root for parama, which means an excellency. So that's why they're called the 6 perfections often. The Tibetan etymology is a little different. They look at it as param ita, which Sanskrit grammarians would disagree with, but the Tibetans don't really have any care about that. So param being far or distant, and ita meaning have gone to the far shore. So the Tibetan is very literal, paro tu chimpa, having gone to the far shore being Buddhahood, having gone across the ocean of samsara to reach Buddhahood. That's the far shore, having traveled to the far shore. And so it's translated sometimes as the transcendental activities of the bodhisattvas, or the excellent activities, or the perfected activities. These all are translated in this idea of paramita. I think both of these etymologies are useful for us to think about what is a paramita. So when we say paramita, it is an excellent quality. It is a type of mental behavior that embodies all of the excellences of, or all the perfections of Buddhahood. But it is a journey, right? So the paramitas are a journey. They're something we practice to achieve Buddhahood, right? They are part of our process. So in general, we say there are 6 paramitas. Sometimes there are 10. we'll talk about all 10, but we'll focus on the main 6. Now, if you study in any of the Theravada traditions, they do list paramitas as well, but they're not the same. There's overlap, but they're not quite the same. They have the same idea, right? They're these perfected or highly excelled practices for advanced practitioners, but they're a little bit different. So just anyone that has interaction with Theravada communities, you might have some discrepancies. That's okay. So what are the 6 paramitas? And they go in order in general. So let's start with them. So the first one is generosity. Oh, you're hiding behind a pillar roof there. Hello. So generosity is the first one. Here, why don't we just go through all 6 and then we'll do more details. So we have generosity first, and then no, 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 no.
Patience.
Ethical discipline, morality. Ethical discipline is the second one. Okay. You're correct. These are the ones you're listing are paramitas, but not the right order. Metta or Maitri, we say in Sanskrit, or loving or compassion, is considered a paramita in the Theravada tradition, but it's not in ours. It's a preliminary practice that leads to paramitas. So we start with generosity, then we have ethical discipline, and then we have patience, then we have joyous effort or diligence, and then concentration, and lastly, wisdom. So those are the 6, right? Generosity, morality or ethics, patience, diligence or joyous effort, concentration, and wisdom. If we were to add on the final 4 that sometimes get taught, then you have skillful means is the next one that's taught. You have aspirational prayers, which really is how you practice the Bodhisattva vows. You have strength. Strength is the depth and effort that Bodhisattvas put into engaging in all of their activities, right? That they're not just surface level. And then you have sometimes knowledge, sometimes translated as exalted wisdom. So it's slightly different than the perfection of wisdom. It has to do with understanding the different types of wisdom that you achieve throughout the process. It's hard to explain if you don't understand exalted wisdom first, so I can explain it later. So those are the 10. And now there are many different ways to categorize them. They're in order, not because we have to perfectly complete one of them before we move on, right? But they're in order of the way we engage with reality, but we have to practice all 6 of them all the time, basically. And one of the ways they're divided, actually, is instead of having 6, they're understood as being 36 paramitas. So for instance, the first one is generosity, but they say generosity, there is also the generosity of generosity, and there is the ethical discipline of generosity, and the patience of generosity, and so forth. So all of the 6 are contained in the other 5. And in that way, they're sometimes expanded into 36. And that's not important for our study right now, except to realize that they're not isolated practices, that they all are inclusive of each other. So we have to find a way to engage in all of them, right? So with that, let's think about generosity first. So generosity is not the act of giving, right? Generosity is the mind that wishes to give. Now, that's not to say we shouldn't engage in giving. If you only think about it but never do it, but you have the means to do it, then you're actively avoiding it, right? But the more important part is the mind. And generally, we say it's the mind that wishes to give away even one's own body and one's wealth, as well as one's roots of virtue, right? So it's the mind that wishes to give away everything of value to others. And there are 3 types of generosity. The first one is the first thing we think of. It is giving away material objects, right? The second is giving away or the offering of Dharma. So giving Dharma is a type of generosity. And the last one is called giving fearlessness or protection, right? So what do these all mean? So giving of material objects is very common. It's understandable. It's what you think it is. And it's important to practice generosity in large part because it helps combat our own miserliness, our own attachment, our own greed, right? So from our side, it helps overcome negative minds, but it also actively serves others, this practice of material generosity. So when we're engaging in generosity, it has to be without expectations. If we expect anything in return, even just gratitude, then it's not a full open-hearted mind of generosity because we're expecting some sort of reciprocity. So We have to have the mind that is giving wholeheartedly and isn't expecting anything in response. And, I've seen great examples of students make offerings to teachers all the time, right? And high teachers, they get way more than they need. They don't need all these things. But when you have 100 students, they're all making offerings to you, then you get more than you need. And I've been in receiving lines where we go and make offerings to the teacher, and I'll see someone give an offering to a teacher, like say a box of chocolates I've seen, and then the teacher thanks them and then gives that box of chocolates to the next student in the line because they don't need it. And so once they receive it, then they give it away. And then you've seen that original gifter become very upset. Like, I got that for you. I offered that to you. And you say, well, clearly you didn't give it to them because you're still attached to it, right? If you had given it to them, you wouldn't be attached to it anymore. But you expected a very specific outcome. And so because of that, it wasn't a wholehearted giving. Even though you had the best of intentions, you still had some sort of grasping onto it, right? So when we give, we need to try to give without any expectation, which is hard, right? It's really hard. So we can start with giving trivial things. We shouldn't be expected to give everything all at once. But we start with small things as best we can, and that builds up the habit of giving. It makes it become easier. It makes it become second nature. More important than giving material things, though, is giving Dharma. So what does that mean? It can mean teaching, but it also can mean engaging in virtuous activity in the presence of others so that they can observe and learn what it means to live a spiritually valuable life. Right? It doesn't mean telling everyone how they have to live their life. It doesn't mean criticizing people when they engage in non-virtue, but it can be giving them advice, right? Not in necessarily a teaching capacity, but just giving advice to your friends or your family, using Buddhist language or not using Buddhist language as is appropriate. But it also just means living your life according to the teachings of the Buddha in such a way that others can observe you and they can learn Dharma through your actions. That's a type of giving, okay? And then the last one, giving of fearlessness. This is generally taught to be helping protect sentient beings who are suffering. So some of the examples we get for this are if there are sentient beings who are obviously in pain or misery, helping them and relieving their suffering, but also if there are, for instance, animals who are bought and are destined to be killed, to be eaten at a restaurant, then purchasing them and then saving them from that fate is considered giving the gift of fearlessness or the gift of protection. So we don't always have the opportunity to give that as often as the first two, but it is important when we can, because we think of, we go to the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, the refuge, for our own protection, right? And so by giving the gift of protection to others, that is one way for us to embody the activities of a Buddha, right? And so it's useful because it creates the imprint and the habit of protecting others from harm. Even if you're just, buying a bunch of fish that are going to be sold and then releasing them back into the ocean. So those are the 3 types of generosity. And so it's important. What we need to do is try to incorporate this not just into our meditation practice and say it's important to give, but actually see how can we do this about our everyday life, right? Now, generosity, to some extent, we can see opportunities for it all the time. It's very easy, right? And we can't just give everything away and be left with nothing, because if we remove all of our opportunities and our means that we use to practice, that's not skillful, right? So hand in hand with all of these is being skillful. But we can see opportunities for generosity all the time. And so bringing generosity into our everyday life, first in small ways and then in bigger ways, is one of the ways that we encourage our mind to become more like the mind of the Bodhisattva. So I'll get more to that. Let's go through the other practices and do some meditation, and we'll get back to that. So the second one is morality or ethical discipline. And so this is very similar to what we've been talking about, following the avoiding the 10 non-virtuous activities, right? So the first type of ethical discipline is refraining from non-virtuous actions. But the second type is gathering or engaging in virtuous behavior. So it's not just avoiding non-virtue, but actively seeking out beneficial or virtuous behavior. And then the third one is acting for the welfare of sentient beings. So not just engaging in virtue, but specifically doing it with the intent to benefit others is a type of morality, right? And, we have teachings that say that ethical discipline is, if we don't have strong ethical discipline, then we can't achieve any of our goals. You need to be able to maintain ethical discipline, even to achieve, concentration, even to achieve mindfulness. You have to have ethical discipline, right? So it serves as a foundational practice. What I find interesting is, so in the Bodhicharyavatara, the way of the Bodhisattva by Shantideva, the main teachings of ethical discipline are taught in a chapter that is focused on carefulness and introspection, right? So ethical discipline comes under the heading often of introspection, of observing your mind and how it relates to the world around you. So the real question is, what is the benefit of engaging in morality? Like, how does that part of our practice? And for those of us that have been studying karma, then we can see the simple understanding that the law of cause and effect, but also in a very immediate sense, if we think about engaging behavior that is in line with our own spiritual values, then we know just the sense of accomplishment and satisfaction that comes from engaging in that behavior. And how often have you done something that maybe was a little bit not great, right? And then you felt bad about that, right? And that affected the way you existed in the world because you said, this was a little bit shady. Like I was a little bit meaner than I had to be. I wasn't as honest as I should have been. Maybe I didn't lie, but I wasn't quite 100% honest, right? And then you have remorse about that, right? And that affects your relationships with others. That affects how you do your job, how you go to work, how you treat your family. When you can be honest and open, and you're always following a virtuous path, it makes you it makes your mind much more expansive. There's nothing to be afraid of, right? You don't have any fear because you haven't engaged in actions that would cause others to resent you or to harm you. So there's a freeing capacity to engaging in ethical discipline, right? It opens up your behavior in your mind so you don't ever feel like you're imprisoned. So ethical discipline is a critical cornerstone for our practice. And I know that going about the day, there are so many opportunities that I have to remind myself of engaging in ethical discipline, right? There are so many opportunities, even in my everyday life, where it'd just be easier to tell a little white lie because either I'm afraid of upsetting someone or because it just makes things smoother, right? Sometimes. How often is just the shortest, easiest way just to tell a little white lie? Who's going to get hurt by that, right? But we're getting hurt by that, right? I'm getting hurt by that every time I tell a little white lie. And there are many things throughout the day where it could just be easier to take the shortcut route. But at the same time, you don't want to weaponize your ethical discipline. There's a whole movement, at least a couple of years ago, about radical honesty or brutal honesty, which is really just people being mean to everyone else, but saying, no, I'm just being honest. I don't want to lie. And they're just using that as an excuse to be like really mean, essentially. We need to be skillful in the way we engage with others. So if we're being honest with others and they ask us something we know our answer is not going to be pleasing to them, we have to find a way to share that in a way that's helpful and not just mean, right? So don't use the cover of I'm being honest as an excuse to kind of be a jerk, which in my experience, some people do. But it's critical that we go about our day trying to avoid the 10 non-virtuous actions. So obviously not killing, not stealing, not engaging in sexual misconduct, not lying, not engaging in divisive speech, not engaging in harsh or critical speech, and not engaging in idle chatter or gossip. And then maintaining minds of non-maliciousness, non-covetousness, and not entertaining wrong views that distort our relationship to reality. So when we engage in those actions, they're always going to be causing us harm. Never mind the harm they cause to others, right? And so a bodhisattva naturally is disinclined to engage in any of those. And then that builds on, or building on that, we have then patience, which is the next bodhisattva practice. So generally, a mind of patience is a mind that is undisturbed when experiencing harm or suffering. That's what we mean by patience, okay? A mind that is not disturbed when it experiences harm or suffering. And so often this is building off of morality, because sometimes, as you mentioned, doing the morally correct thing to do is more difficult, right? And it requires more effort from our part. And so being able to be undisturbed by that is a practice of patience. We generally say there are three types of patience as well. There's patience that is not being disturbed by unruly other sentient beings who are causing harm to you, or people that are harming you. And then there is the joyful acceptance of suffering when it comes. That's not seeking out suffering, but when you experience it, trying to experience it with a joyful mind. And this includes, coming to a center and sitting through a 2-hour Dharma teaching, which is not comfortable all the time. It may be hot. There may be difficult conditions. That is a type of suffering, right? This physical suffering we experience. But being willing to do that for the sake of engaging in Dharma study is a type of patience, right? So even that small thing is a practice of patience. That's not to say that you should embrace suffering. That's not to say that you should enjoy it, but it's to say that I can joyfully recognize it and not let it disturb my mind, right? Even if my body is in pain, that's not going to upset my mind. So allowing my mind to stay focused on whatever my task is. And then the third type of patience is the patience that works to gain confidence in the teachings of the Buddha or in the Dharma, or the patience to remain interested in the Dharma. And that is critically important when we feel overwhelmed and we feel like our spiritual path isn't bringing us anywhere, or there's too many topics to study and we're too new to it and everything's too much, right? That feeling of being overwhelmed or burnt out. This patience is a remedy to that. And saying, I'm still confident in the teachings of the Buddha. Maybe I need to readjust how I'm going about my practice or my study, but I still am developing. I'm not letting my mind be disturbed by the fact that I'm not making the progress that I want. I'm not letting my mind fall into this way of saying that this doesn't matter because it is difficult for me to practice, right? In the Bodhicharyavatara, the chapter on patience is the 6th chapter. It's one of the most famous chapters. There's lots of quotes from it. Many of them are quite great. And Shantideva says, unruly sentient beings cannot be subdued, and they are as vast as space. But if you defeat the angry mind, then it is the same as defeating all unruly sentient beings. And that's because patience is the supreme antidote to anger. That's the reason patience is taught so often, and it's so important. It's impossible to have an active mind of patience and an active mind of anger at the same time, right? Because patience is, by its very nature, being undisturbed by harm or suffering. And anger is the mind that wants to cause harm and suffering to others. It's impossible for them to both be manifest simultaneously. And of all of the afflicted minds that we can have, anger is always non-virtuous. The other afflicted minds can be neutral, right? All of them can be. But anger is always going to be non-virtuous. It's always going to be harming ourselves. So being able to develop patience is considered the supreme of all of your austere practices, because it is an antidote to the most deleterious or damaging of the negative minds or of the afflicted minds.
But you can conceive of something like righteous anger. Suppose someone's being cruel to someone else. Then you get angry, but that's not non-virtuous, it's righteous anger, because you're trying to point out that what was doing. Maybe if it's doing it to you, you can keep quiet and be patient. But if you're doing it to someone else, like a child or something, like sort of innocent person.
In the Buddhist understanding, we say there's no such thing as righteous anger, that is still harmful. But the kind of topography of the mind and mental states isn't so simple that there's just anger and non-anger. Thank you. So I like to think of it as the language I use is that I think there exists a thing such as outrage. And outrage is recognizing others' suffering as a result of injustice and not wanting only to eliminate that suffering, but to right the injustice that is causing that suffering. I think of that as outrage. And that's separate from anger. But the problem is, when our everyday lives, we conflate the two. And we label them as anger, and therefore it becomes justified. Anger is always wanting to cause harm. So anger is looking at injustice and saying, not only do I want to eliminate that suffering and stop whatever injustice is happening, but the person committing that injustice needs to pay, right? They need to suffer as well. That is where the anger comes in. And that is always going to be harmful. It's not going to create a stable foundation for any sort of long-term growth or benefit. The outrage, I think, is a type of compassion, looking at injustice and wanting to end that injustice. But so as people that are really trying to understand our mind, we have to recognize we can separate those two things. We can cultivate a sense of outrage and use that to then fuel and motivate virtuous and compassionate behavior in the world, but not let that be mixed with anger. In the same way that we talk about attachment and loving kindness, the type of love we have for, let's say, our partners or our family is usually mixed with attachment, right? It's not a pure love that just wants them to be happy and experience every type of happiness. It is that, but it's mixed with what can I get from them? You know, whether it be sensual pleasure or just emotional pleasure, or how can I cling to them, right? So our love for others is often mixed with attachment, right? Which then makes it less powerful than if it were actual love. So the kind of Buddhist understanding of the mind says that there are many different types of mental factors and minds that can exist, and we conflate many of them in just our everyday understanding of the world. So part of Buddhist psychology is trying to separate those things and say, this one is useful, let me nurture this one, but let me not nurture the parts of it that are harmful. So righteous anger, we don't think there's any place for it, because anger is always harming others. Even if it seems like you're getting short-term gains, it's not creating a stable foundation for a long-term benefit. But outrage, I think, is useful. That's the language I use. Often the word outrage is just a translation of the same word that we translate as anger in Tibetan. So it gets a little bit difficult when you're dealing with Tibetan terminology. But in English, I use the term outrage. I think can be a positive virtue, but anger I don't think can. The importance of patience, though, is we need to cultivate patience before we get angry. That's the real important part of it, right? All of these practices, obviously, we try to cultivate them in our practice, in our meditation practice. We become familiar with what does it mean to have a mind that wants to constantly give others, that doesn't hold precious or dear any of my own possessions or even my body. Even if I'm not capable of giving my body away right now, trying to develop the mind that wishes to. What does that look like? So I work on that in my meditation practice. The same with all the 6 paramitas, including patience, you know, especially that first patience. Patience that is a mind that remains undisturbed in reaction to others causing you harm. What does that feel like in my body and in my mind? So I work on that on the cushion, because if I don't work on it now, there's no way I'm going to be able to generate patience when I'm actually experiencing harm, right? When someone says something really cruel to me or harms me in some way, there's no way I'm going to be able to have a mind that is undisturbed if I haven't done the work ahead of time. My first thing is going to be anger, right? For most people. So we have to do the work now. And patience is one of the ones that really shows how important it is to set the groundwork ahead of time. One of the ways they talk about developing patience is by recognizing that the people or beings that cause us harm are not, in the same way if someone beats us with a stick, you don't get angry at the stick, because the stick is the tool that's being used by someone else, right? The stick doesn't have any active control. We say that person wielding the stick also doesn't have any real control, because they're under the power of their own karma and their own delusions. So in a worldly sense, yes, they have control, but we say in the bigger picture, they are under the power of their own delusions. And that's really, in the big picture, no different than being angry at the stick. Being angry at the person that's yielding the stick is no different than being angry at the stick themselves, because it doesn't have full control. It's under the power of karma and delusions.
Questions.
Okay.
First one says, how do we reconcile thinking about and serving others without a sense of attachment to them?
Okay. What's the second?
The second one is wondering why equanimity is not a part of the paramitas, so patience seems a part of staying in balance. Good Venerable explanation.
Okay. So obviously, what does it mean to work for others without being attached to them? You know, we do get attached to others, but and that actually goes very well with the question of equanimity. When we did the prayer in the beginning of the 4 immeasurables, the last one is immeasurable equanimity, which is a mindset we're trying to cultivate that says that may I not have attraction to those that are beneficial to friends, and have anger towards those who are enemies, quote unquote, right? So trying to have a mind that treats all sentient beings equally is what we mean by immeasurable equanimity. And the Buddha being a source of valid refuge, we say that if the Buddha had one person on one side massaging scented oil into his muscles, and the other side someone stabbing him with a knife, he would have the same equanimity and mind of compassion to both of them equally, because his ability to care for others isn't dependent on how they treat him, right? And so that's what we need to go for, is to have a mind that treats all sentient beings equal, regardless of their relationship to us. So we tend to say our relationship with other sentient beings are pervaded by either ignorance, attachment, or anger, the three poisons. So those that we have a relationship of strangers, that would be a relationship pervaded by ignorance. Those who we might label as enemies because they cause us harm or cause us disturbed minds are relationships pervaded by anger. And those who we are attached to or cause us some sort of pleasure or delight are pervaded by attachment. So our friends and family. So all of our relationships, our worldly relationships, are pervaded by one of these three root poisons that cause us to suffer in samsara. So we do need to try to cultivate a lack of attachment and realize that we're serving all sentient beings equally. That's our goal, not just the ones that we like, not just the people that are kind to us. Now, that said, we do want to cultivate an attachment to freeing others from suffering. We want to cultivate an attachment to Buddhahood, right? That's not the same thing as a worldly attachment, right? So we have desires. We desire to be free from suffering. That's not the same thing as desiring external happiness, right? It's the same language, but it's not the same thing. So when we are serving others, we have to try to do it in such a way that is not focusing on ourselves. If we still have the self-cherishing mind at the root of our service, then we're going to expect something in return. We're going to expect you to say thank you when I give this to you. I'm going to expect quid pro quo, you give me something in exchange, right? Or I'm going to expect other people to realize what a good person I am, what a kind, benevolent person I am. Even if it's not you, I expect someone to give that to me. That's a self-cherishing mind. That's not a mind actually seeking to serve others. That's a mind using others for your own benefit. Now, even if they receive some benefit as a result, that kind of attitude is one of exploitation and using others, right? It's feeding the self-cherishing mind. So, and again, our habit is to follow the self-cherishing mind. That's what it means to be living in samsara, right? So that's not, don't feel bad if you recognize that self-cherishing mind activating many of your activities, because we've all been doing it. But as someone who's committed to trying to live a spiritual life, we have to try to be aware of that. And so when we engage in any of these activities, such as generosity or any other virtuous activity, we have to be actively thinking, why am I doing this? What is the motivating factor? What am I hoping to get out of this? Am I hoping to get some sort of recognition, some sort of compliment, some sort of anything in exchange? Or am I doing it because I care about them and I want them to experience happiness in this life and in future lives? That's what we have to look at. And it's a matter of analyzing your own mind when you engage in activities, right? And one of the things I think I like to do is, and one of the reasons I advocate for meditating in the evenings, is then you can go through your day and look at the things you did that day and say, what motivated me to be engaged in these behaviors? And were any of them really pure selfless behaviors? Or were they mixed? Or were they purely selfish behaviors, right? We can go through our day, notice the places where we didn't live up to our own ideals, and then make a commitment to be better in the future. That's part of what it means to be doing this work, is to be constantly analyzing your own mind, rejoicing in all the places that you succeed, and then recognizing where you don't succeed and not beating yourself up about it, but committing to be better, right? So equanimity and not having attachment to those you serve means trying to serve all others equally, regardless of how they relate to you, and then not expecting anything in return. I hope that helps with that question. So we could go on and on about patience. At some point, I think we've actually done a whole series where we just studied the 6th chapter once of Bodhicharya. So we can maybe do that again in the future. But instead, we'll move on for now, because I would like to have some time to meditate today. So the fourth of the 6 perfections, or transcendent activities, is joyous effort, or diligence. And this is very similar to patience. But the very nature of this is a mind that is glad to perform virtue. So in that way, it's very similar to rejoicing. When I talk about rejoicing, right? Finding joy in virtue. Diligence is joy or gladness in performing virtue, right? So it is a type of mind that is willing to engage in difficulty or suffering or hardship for the sake of virtuous activity, especially to benefit others, right? So it's not, so patience is more about navigating suffering and difficulties that come to you from others or just from your environment. Whereas diligence is recognizing that putting in effort, joyous effort, and being glad about that effort, not being overwhelmed by it. So a nature of gladness in virtuous activity. And so joyous effort especially combats laziness, right? And well, first off, let's say there are three types of joyous effort. The first one we call armor-like joyous effort. And that one is the joyous effort that is willing to actively engage in suffering for the benefit of others. You know, so the example they give is developing a mind that would be willing to be reborn in a hell realm if it means you could benefit the sentient beings in that hell realm. Having a mind that says, I don't want only luxury. I'm willing to go into difficult places in order to help others. And we see that in our worldly life. How many people go on work projects and are willing to go do physical labor to help others, right? To go to poor communities and help build homes or help engage in physical service work. That takes a type of armor-like joyous effort. Not the same as developing the willingness to go to a hell realm, but it's the same continuum, right? Willing to engage in activities that you know are going to cause you some sort of suffering, whether it be physical suffering or another type of suffering, because you're helping others in the process. And so it's a mind that says, I'm going to go, you know, when if your neighbor, let's say there is, okay, good example, when there's an earthquake, right? And you see people's homes are destroyed, and then their neighbors all rally together to help them, to either rebuild their home or things like this. That's effort. Like building a home takes physical effort, right? Cleaning out when there's a fire, cleaning out the debris takes physical effort. And that is a type of suffering, or can be. But it's okay, I'm willing to engage in that suffering because I'm benefiting others, right? That's a type of perseverance. That's the armor-like joyous effort. That's the kind of smallest version of it we can do, but that's something we can cultivate in our lives. The next two types are very similar to patience, where there is the joyous effort of gathering virtuous activity. So it's a mind that that is committed to engaging in virtue, which includes your study and your practice. And so, for instance, when you find practice tedious and you just like, you know what, I'd just rather watch Netflix and not sit down for these 20 minutes and meditate, why not? But then you say, you know what, I'm going to meditate anyway. Even if I don't, it's not going to benefit me in this immediate moment. I recognize that it's beneficial for my practice, that continuation, and then doing it anyway, that takes effort, right? And so trying to do that without a mind of resentment, but a mind of joy, a mind of lightness, is joyous effort. And that is the effort of gathering virtue. And the same with study, the same with all these things. And then the third type of joyous effort is the joyous effort that is working to benefit other sentient beings. So it's very similar to the joyous effort, to the patience that is working to benefit sentient beings. Pabong Rinpoche advises us to keep them separate, but he says that if you look at patience and joyous effort and diligence, patience, morality, patience, and diligence, they both have divisions that are working to gather virtue for yourself and working to benefit other sentient beings. So it seems like there's a lot of overlap, but he says in your practice, it's good to keep them separate because that helps you make each of them stronger. And then as your practice gets bigger, you don't have to think about that as much. Is there a question online? I hear some sound coming. No? Okay. But so the most important thing when we think of joyous effort is, what is it serving as the antidote for? So in the same way that patience is the primary antidote to anger, joyous effort is the primary antidote to laziness. And it's worth talking a little bit about laziness. I know a lot about laziness. I'm very good at it. I excel in laziness. There are three types of laziness that we want to avoid. And this is why I think it's useful to think about it, because I don't think they're all expected. The first type of laziness is exactly what you think of. It's the laziness of sloth, we say. And that is just procrastination, putting off till tomorrow, not willing to do something. Never mind a virtuous activity, just wanting to put anything off, right? So when we talk about laziness in a worldly sense, that's what we're used to, the laziness of sloth. The second type of laziness, we say, is actually a laziness of seeking out non-Dharma activity. So it's a type of effort towards worldly activity is a type of laziness because it's avoiding virtuous behavior or spiritual behavior in favor of non-spiritual behavior, right? So that's the type of laziness. It may look like you're really busy. You may be exerting a lot of effort, but really what it is you're avoiding beneficial activity. You're avoiding spiritual practice. That's a type of laziness, okay? So diligence isn't just saying you have to work hard all the time. It's working hard in the right areas, right? And then the third type of laziness is what we call the laziness of defeatism, of low self-value and saying, I'm not good enough to do this. There's no point in me studying these teachings because I'm never going to be good enough to do it. I'm not going to become a Buddha in this life. Why should I exert effort? I'm not going to, solve world hunger. So why should I put any effort into it? That kind of attitude is a type of laziness, or saying, I'm never going to be able to keep all of the Bodhisattva vows perfectly purely, so I'm not even going to take them. I'm not good enough for it. That is a type of laziness. And so the way we overcome it is by developing a mind that finds joy in the practice of virtue and is recognizing that it takes effort to engage in virtuous behavior. And that effort itself is joyful. I think the laziness of defeatism is one at least I am quite familiar with. Anyone that has like a type A personality wants to be the best at whatever they do. And if I'm not going to be the best at this thing, then maybe I just won't do it. Like there are a lot of things that I'd rather not be embarrassed by doing something poorly, so I just don't do it. And you think of how many opportunities you waste with that kind of attitude, especially going, through high school and college, things I chose not to do because I didn't want to look foolish and I knew that I couldn't do them perfectly. So then I just lost these opportunities. And now that's a worldly example, right? It's not a spiritual example, but it's the same mindset that if we just say, if I'm not good enough to do it, I'm not going to do it at all. How much do we miss out on, both in a worldly sense and in a spiritual sense? So that we classify as a type of laziness. And we overcome it by developing a mind that is committed to engaging in virtue. And so we think of that armor-like perseverance, the willingness to experience suffering for the benefit of others. That is the strongest of the three types of diligence or joyous effort that'll help overcome laziness. Now, the next of the 6 paramitas, in some ways, is I don't want to say it's the most important because they're all important, but one of the most critical for us to practice, and this is concentration, right? And so when we study concentration, we tend to study how to develop calm abiding. And so if you study any of the texts, the teachings on calm abiding often come when you're talking about concentration and all the long-term texts. Maybe the one that is taught as the most expansively that is within the text we study often is in Tsongkhapa's middle length Lamrim. But so concentration is important because without concentration, how can we engage in any spiritual activity? We just have distraction all the time, right? We can't stay focused. So developing a mind of concentration is critical to developing everything else, right? All of our practice, which is why when we start out, we do simple mindfulness meditation. And that's the first meditation many people study. And it's critical. It's really important. You never give it up. It's always important to be engaging in that practice because it serves as the foundation to build on, I remember once I was in Singapore for Lama Zopa Rinpoche's Long Life Puja, and a bunch of monks and nuns were on doing an animal liberation. So we had, along with members of the community, has bought a couple $100 worth of seafood that was going to be going to restaurants. And we brought our boat out to feed it, right? After doing all these prayers and everything else. And we were in some sort of holding pattern. We were waiting at like the dock or something. And I was with one of the senior nuns in the FPMT community, named Venerable Joan, and another nun, who I won't name, a relatively young, newer nun, was talking to us. And she said, oh, I don't know how it came up, but she said, I don't practice mindfulness anymore because I practice Tantra. And Joan and I just looked at each other and we're like, what now? And that kind of shows a misunderstanding, right, of what it means to practice Tantra. Because if you don't have mindfulness, then what are you doing when you visualize any sort of tantric meditation? You don't have any stability, right? You need to practice mindfulness. Whether we call it shamatha is the actual achieving of calm abiding, but any sort of mindfulness is critical, right? If you can't control your mind, how can you do any sort of other practice? So to some degree, we have to start with concentration. Even though we really need to do all 6 at the same time, concentration serves as a really important bedrock. Now, I will say achieving mindfulness, achieving calm abiding, what we mean by that, shamatha, is the ability to engage in single-pointed concentration on any object of our choice without any effort. And not only is it without effort, but it brings about a sense of, we say, the joy of mental pliancy. So there is a physiological joyous sensation that comes about that single-pointed concentration. That's what it means to actually have calm abiding. And our teachers say that we could achieve that in about 6 months if you only practice and you have all the proper conditions, right? And now that's difficult for anyone living in the world that is living a worldly life. But what are those proper conditions? It's useful to know them, because then we can try to shape our lives around them as best we can. So the first one is having a conducive place. That is what's most important. So if you look in the middle length Lamrim, Tsongkhapa says, abandon your homeland. Find an isolated place. Those are the 2 steps he says first. Abandon your homeland, because your homeland is filled with people that you have long relationships with. So you already have minds of attachment and anger that are around those relationships, and they make it difficult for you to engage in practice. Now, it's not to say never go back to your homeland, but it's saying while you're engaging in the developing of calm abiding, trying to create a space for yourself that is without those distractions helps. Find an isolated place where you don't have those distractions, right? So having a conducive place is important. Now, what Pavolka says, the characteristics of a conducive place, and he takes this from the Jewel Ornament Sutra, maybe? I don't remember his source. But the first one is a place that has excellent provisions. So basically, a place that it provides you with what you need, so you don't have to constantly be going into town to be getting supplies, whatever they may be, right? So that may mean having supplies brought to you or being able to live off the land, but a place where you aren't constantly leaving your retreat space to have to go find the things you need to survive, right? So you have to have good provisions. It should also be a wholesome place. So it shouldn't be a place where there are, we say negative spirits or bad things have happened, essentially, right? Not a place that carries some sort of heavy karmic weight. It should be a healthy place, which is a place that isn't going to cause you to get sick. So a place with clean water, with no pollution, things like this. So it should be a healthy place. And then it should be a place that has noble friends nearby. So you don't have to be in complete isolation, but you shouldn't be around people that are going to be causing a disturbing mind. So they say a virtuous or a noble friend, it's like when there are 2 shadows, but a single silhouette. So you should be surrounding yourself with people that have the same spiritual goals as yourself, right? So there are many communities of meditators, right? And they may not engage in a lot of interaction, but they're in proximity to each other where they can help each other if they need to. So you should surround yourself with people that have a similar mindset as you and are same similar goals. And then just a place that has the facilities necessary to support the yogin, the practitioner. So it's a means to have a conducive place, a place that is not going to cause physical harm.
Quiet also, no running water and no loud noise.
Yes, that's the more elaborate discussion. When you say an isolated place, what do we mean by isolated? That's true. But here, conducive is, at least this language, you're talking about having a place that's wholesome, that is not going to cause sickness, that is going to give you everything you need, and that you are with other people that are sharing your same spiritual goals. When you talk about an isolated place, then it's also a place that isn't adding to your distraction, right? Not
What isolated?
Isolated place, yeah. So depending on the teaching, how elaborate they talk about it. So in the middle length Lamrim, he says very clearly, abandon your homeland, find an isolated place. In the extensive Lamrim, and in Pabonka's commentary, he doesn't mention that. He mentions these 5. So it just depends on which teaching you're following, but it's valid in any case, right? The whole goal is to remove distractions. So next, in addition to wanting a conducive place, you should have few wants, right? And this is very similar to the third one, which is being content. So having few wants is not wanting excessive amounts of goods, and being content is not needing the highest quality of goods. It's recognizing that what is the minimal thing you can survive off of and be healthy and not cause yourself harm, but not needing more than that. You know what I mean? You don't need caviar in order to survive in a meditation retreat, right? You need food, enough food to keep your body healthy, but you don't need excessive food, and you don't need the finest quality, most delicious food. You need healthy food that's going to allow your body to be stable, right? So having few wants and being content. Those are the second and third conducive, necessary preconditions to develop a mind of concentration. And then abandon your demands on society. This is a difficult one. And this is interesting because abandoning the demands of society can mean many different things. Habonka says it even means for monks, part of what monks do is they serve others by performing rituals, by giving Dharma teachings, by doing these things. These are still demands of society. So if your real goal is to achieve single point of concentration, you should abandon going out into town and performing rituals, performing pujas, doing these things, because they're contradictory to your goal of achieving calm abiding, right? Now, obviously, if you have other worldly demands, like going to work, dealing with family, friends, these things, if you really want to achieve calm abiding in the most expedient way possible, you have to abandon them for the time being. So most of us don't have that luxury, but that is a precondition to quickly achieving calm abiding. And even though we can't necessarily do it completely, recognizing that that is a precondition, that helps us orient our lives to abandon those things we can abandon, right? That's what these teachings help us do. Having pure ethics, he mentions, is another one. So this gets back to ethics. If you really want to achieve calm abiding, you have to be practicing virtue and avoiding non-virtue. And then lastly, you should be working assiduously to abandon conceptual ideas such as desire and attachment. So any of your afflicted minds, you should be working to abandon them. And the reason he mentions this is because calm abiding, this level of concentration, isn't uncommon to Buddhists. You don't have to be Buddhist to achieve calm abiding. Anyone can achieve calm abiding, right? It's just an ability to focus your mind in a very specific way. So there's lots of stories of non-Buddhist practitioners achieving calm abiding. But if it's not balanced with ethical discipline and with an active attempt to be free from the deluded minds, then it's not going to be stable. And so the story Pabonka Rinpoche gives is of a sadhu who is engaging in meditation practice, and he achieves calm abiding, and then he notices he exits his meditation, and there are a bunch of rats that have been eating his hair because he's been sitting in meditation so long. And once he exits meditation, he realizes there are these rats eating his hair, and he just gets so angry at them that all of his realizations and all of the achievement that he'd worked so hard disappears right away, because he hadn't done any work to get rid of his negative minds. He was just focusing on concentration. So calm abiding is something we can achieve in our lifetimes if we are able to really embrace those 6 preconditions, finding an isolated place, dedicating full time 100% of our practice to achieving it. They say even someone who doesn't have any level of meditative capacity, if they do 100% full-time commit themselves, can achieve this in 6 months. Now, most of us can't leave the world for 6 months, right? I know I can't. Even I have responsibilities, never mind here, but at the monastery, all these things, I have responsibilities. And yet, that for me makes it's a very promising idea that maybe right now, I don't have the time that I could physically do this. But the fact that this is something I can achieve in this life, that anyone can achieve in this life, even if I'm not able to create the conditions to achieve that now, it shows that whatever practice I can do now will have benefits in this very life for taming my mind, right? It's something very achievable. And that's useful because so often we're talking about becoming Buddhist to benefit all sentient beings. That seems so far away, right? Even becoming a Bodhisattva, even developing actual compassion that doesn't require effort on my part, can feel very far away sometimes. Sometimes it feels natural and easy, but a lot of times it feels like, oh, I have a long way to go, right? This is something I can achieve in 6 months. Like anyone can achieve it in 6 months if they have the right conditions and the right effort, right? Now, maybe I don't have those conditions or effort now, but that's really, it just makes me feel very, it's very promising, right? It beats back any of my defeatism. This is what's the point in practicing? Because everything is so long-term that there's nothing important for me to do right now. So even though I don't have the 6 months to go live in a cave, which I would like, I don't have. For those who have been center members for a while, they know Venerable Geshe Tenzin Namdak. All he wants to do is live in caves. He desperately does not want to do anything besides find caves and meditate. But unfortunately, he is an incredibly educated Geshe who's good at teaching. So he's requested to teach all the time. So he runs a center in England now, where he's a huge benefit to many, many people. But if he had his way, and his teachers didn't say you have to teach because you have this skill and this ability, he would probably go find a cave for as long as he could.
I had a question, just to come back to the issue of patience, and sorry to go back.
No, that's okay.
Now, speaking from personal experience, suppose you're in a context where you're constantly interacting with a person who, mocks you or puts you down and behind your back, but you know it's happening. And so one thing to do would be to retort and then tell that person what you're doing is not right and I don't like it. And if you have something against me, please, come up in the open and explain. And if you've done that, but that person doesn't change their ways, then it's pointless telling them over and over again. So instead of seeing it as a negative, if you look at it, I need to exercise patience, not as just suffering it, but you tell yourself it's actually happening for my own good because it's helping me to become patient. I'm not going to respond again. I'm not going to react again as I did earlier because that didn't change the situation. It didn't transform that person. So I'm going to keep quiet and let that person go on behaving as they want to. I'm going to see this as a positive rather than a negative because it's helping me develop patience and long suffering, as they call it, right? And maybe I can send metta to this person. And so it's helping me become non-reactive. So when I see it as a positive, then maybe that will help me because otherwise, naturally, instinctively, you want to, retort.
Yeah. So patience itself is exactly as you're saying. They're retorting and or trying to change their behavior isn't an act of patience, right? Now, it can be a beneficial act because they're causing harm, right? So if you're able to explain it in such a way and to cause them to realize that they're being harmful, to cease their non-virtuous behavior, that can be beneficial. But patience is exactly as you're saying, recognizing that this is an opportunity for me to not have a disturbed mind in response to their harm. My mind isn't going to be disturbed no matter how much they're criticizing me or insulting me to my face or behind my back. So that's what patience actually is. There's actually a story of Lama Atisha, the Bengali saint who went to Tibet. And they say sometimes he was traveling with the jester from, I don't remember the king, but one of the king's courts, a jester would travel with him. And this jester was basically a jerk. And a lot of the people that were part of Atisha's retinue were like, why do you keep him around? Let's just get rid of him. And Atisha's like, no, he's the most critical. How could I ever practice patience if I didn't have him around? Right? How could I develop a mind of patience if I didn't have someone bothering me all the time? So a lot of the high lamas actually talk about developing patience. It's hard for them because they don't have people pushing their buttons because they're treated with such respect all the time that they don't have anyone that is attacking them in any way. So it's hard to develop patience when you don't have that external stimuli. It requires more work, right? So he said, no, we can't get rid of him. He's critical. I need him, right? So in this way, that's a useful way to recognize it. Now, again, as I've always said, we shouldn't be subjecting ourselves unduly to suffering. And if there is a way to extricate yourself from that situation or to request that they stop causing that harm, I think it's a valid thing to do, right? Especially because we don't want them to causing more non-virtuous behavior on their side. And also because we're not perfected beings. So if we don't have perfect patience, we might still be reacting in harmful ways. So if you have the means to remove yourself from that situation or to modify that situation in a worldly way, we should still employ that. But recognize that it is an opportunity to practice patience. And it is an opportunity to develop the mind of the Bodhisattva. And the Buddha or Bodhisattva wouldn't be bothered by any insults, right? It's our self-cherishing mind that is bothered by insults.
The ego
or the self-cherishing mind. Yeah, when someone insults me, it's like, how are their words causing me such pain? It's because my self-cherishing mind has a projected idea of what I am and who I am, and their words are challenging that projected idea. So the fact that their words are harming me is because of my own self-cherishing mind. Their words themselves only have power because I give them power, right? Which isn't to say that they don't hurt, because they do hurt, because that's how we live in the world. But we're trying to develop a way to not experience that. So we're getting rid of our self-cherishing mind, and patience helps us do that, right? But so you're correct. It's an opportunity to practice. Sure.
Question is, disenchantment and dispassion seen by being insensitive or a sense of alienation or indifference, as we tend to isolate ourselves from social settings or be asocial. How do we find a balance?
That's a good question. It goes a little bit to what we were talking about in the very beginning. So Buddhism isn't encouraging us to be asocial and to avoid others. The whole point is to be benefiting others to the best of our ability, serving others to the best of our ability. Depending on your own your pre-existing karmic inclinations, that may mean being active in a community. It may mean retreating and doing private work, or some combination for most of us. So what we need to do is, when we are finding ourselves cutting ourselves off from others or isolating, be aware of that and say, why am I doing this? Am I honest about me trying to develop my own spiritual journey? Or am I just avoiding difficulty, avoiding obstacles? Is this actually indulging a type of laziness or a type of self-cherishing, right? And analyze. And, I can't look at it from the outside and say one thing or the other. You have to do the work on your own and say, why am I doing this? Is it just because I want my life to be easier? Or is it because I genuinely want to develop my mind and this is an obstacle to that, And so by doing that critical analysis, then you can see, okay, I realize this isn't entirely a pure spiritual behavior. So then you try to find ways to push yourself out of your comfort zone, right? And it's not easy and you go slow. That's what you have to do with it. But it is tempting to realize that so many things are easier if you don't have annoying people around. And so then there is the, especially at the beginning of practice, it can be tempting to isolate yourself and to become almost misanthropic, right? Which is the opposite of what we're trying to do. So one of the easy ways to overcome that, or to begin the process of overcoming it, is reminding yourself, why am I doing this work? And it's not because I want my life to be easy. It's because I want to serve others. And as long as that bodhicitta motivation, like we talked about in the beginning, is really what is serving as the driving force, that will help you, when you remind yourself of that, that will help you align your behavior in such a way that it's maximizing whatever your current abilities and skill sets and resources are. Some people may not have the resources to spend a lot of time with others. I know people that are very empathic, and spending too much time in big crowds is really exhausting for them and really draining. And they do it as much as they can, but it takes a toll on them. And so they need to go recharge sometimes, right? So they have to find that balance of how can I be of service to others and take care of my own mind, right? So you have to find the balance of how you can be of most benefit, which is going to look different, not just on different people, but depending on where you are in your life. So let's cover the last one, because I would like to have some time to meditate. So the last of the 6 perfections is wisdom. Do you have anything else to say about concentration first? No, I think I said everything wrong. So wisdom, in this context, the perfection of wisdom, we say there are 3 types of wisdom. There is the wisdom that realizes the ultimate nature of reality, wisdom that realizes conventional aspect of reality, and the wisdom that recognizes what is the most beneficial way to serve and work for sentient beings. So there's the 3 types of wisdom. But the most important of those, in this context, is the wisdom that realizes the nature of reality. The wisdom that understands things as they are, is not truly existing, is not inherently existing. So it's the wisdom that fights the fundamental ignorance that serves as the cause or the root cause of samsara. So one of the ways they explain wisdom is that if the other 5 perfections are like a group of blind people, wisdom is what guides them. So wisdom is critical to make all of our other practices more powerful. Otherwise, you're just wandering around not knowing what to do, right? So a lot of time when we talk about being compassionate, for instance, so we say we have to have these 2 collections, right? The collection of wisdom and the collection of merit, or wisdom and skillful means, or compassion, these 2 aspects of our practice. And you have to combine them. So you might think that giving charity to homeless people is being compassionate. And that's true. But if you just walk down the street throwing money out the rickshaw as you drive by, that's not a wise way to be charitable, right? And that is an extreme example, I know. But you need to use your wisdom when engaging in compassion, because you want to make it as beneficial as you can. Now, sometimes the circumstances, you're never going to have maximum benefit. It's only going to be worldly benefit. That's fine. But you don't do it blindly. You use your wisdom with your compassion. And then you use your compassion to shape your wisdom as well, right? But so the perfection of wisdom is working to realize the true nature of reality. And then by doing that, it affects the way you engage in all the other perfected activities of Bodhisattva. So what's important for thinking of these 6 perfected activities, or the 10 perfected activities, if we like, is it's important to know the different divisions, sure. And it's important to know what they serve as antidotes to, right? So generosity is an antidote to attachment and miserliness. And morality is an antidote to all the non-virtuous behavior. Patience is an antidote to anger. Diligence is an antidote primarily to laziness. Concentration is an antidote to distraction. Wisdom is an antidote to ignorance. So it's important to know, like on a intellectual level. What's more important is how can I incorporate these into my everyday life? And some of them are very easy to incorporate or to begin incorporating, like that practice of generosity, trying to actively develop a mind that wants to give to others. Others may be more difficult, but when we meditate on these 6 perfected activities, then we can see how letting them guide our behavior, our worldly behavior, makes our behavior in line with the behavior of a Bodhisattva. That's the whole goal. And the more we do that, it brings our own minds joy. That's the critical thing. Because if all you're doing, if you think that I'm doing this just to sacrifice myself, then you're not going to be able to sustain it, right? But if you realize that by engaging in these behaviors, including patience and diligence, so willingly accepting difficult situations, is actively part of the process of becoming a Buddha, of actually being content and not being overwhelmed by suffering. And it brings me joy. When you realize that, it creates motivation to continue practicing. So I had wanted to discuss more about how we can bring these into our lives, but first let's do a meditation. And then we will have some time for questions and we'll see where our timing is. So,
That's a question.
sure, ask first.
So, I know like what idle gossip, like entertainment, like Netflix, etc., whatever you call, is not really encouraged when you're doing the Buddhist practice, like every day, like to have a habit of watching.
Mhm.
But can it have a kind of neutral place, especially for beginners, right?
So I do encourage all of these things. Let me be clarifying. But I think we live in the world and trying, especially at the beginning of our practice, but even further along in our practice, trying to pretend that we don't live in the world, trying to pretend that we have all, everything sorted out right away is difficult. So I think we can use our engaging with pop culture, whether it be reading, television, Netflix, going to the movies, any of these things, listening to music, we can use those as part of our spiritual path, right? So I think that they need to be discouraged when we look at any of these kind of engagements with pop culture or worldly exercises, when we use them as opportunities to turn off our mind, our analyzing mind, and say, I don't need to practice Dharma right now. I'm just going to give everything up and watch a show on Netflix. And then let my negative, like my desire, my attachment, and whatever, my lust, whatever it may be, let those be activated. So if you're giving up your practice and saying, I'm taking a break from my practice, then it becomes harmful, right? It becomes a distraction. But if you say, how can I engage in these things in a way that brings me relaxation, lets me navigate the difficulties of life, bring some sort of temporary joy, recognizing this isn't real joy, but it's temporary relief from my stressful day. And I use that in a skillful way. And then I can use that as part of my spiritual practice. So I'm, in numerous classes, I brought up song lyrics and things like that I find useful, or how you can watch different TV shows and use them as an opportunity to meditate on things. The famous thing is Lama Zopa, when his first trip to America with Lama Yeshe, students wanted to bring them to the movies. I think we need to turn the power on for this, Steve. It's beeping at us. So students wanted to bring Lama Yeshe to the movies, and he refused, but said, take Rinpoche. Rinpoche will go. And Rinpoche didn't want to go, but Lama said he had to, so he said, okay, I'll go. Yeah, we're good now. And he said, okay, if we're going to go to the movies, we have to make sure we go to a movie where there's a lot of suffering, so we have something to meditate on, right? So he was being a little bit tongue-in-cheek, but the point is we can engage in pop culture in such a way that it is part of our spiritual practice. And I think that for most of us, that is critical, because, most of us don't have the mental capacity or the mindset to totally shut ourselves off from all of that right now, right? Or if we live in the world, that's part of being part of community, is engaging in some of these things sometimes. So it's a matter of doing it skillfully and not letting our emotional or our undisciplined minds be taking charge. That's the important thing. When I first started at the monastery, as monks, we're discouraged. Anything we do, you're discouraged from doing it mindlessly, right? Including, you shouldn't be listening to music mindlessly. Which is to say, you probably shouldn't be listening to music, because usually it's a chance to turn off your mind. And I was talking to one of my friends about it, and one of the Westerners, who was more or less the same year as me, and he said his teacher very clearly said, no, Like you shouldn't avoid all music because that's your custom, that's your habit, that's your tradition. And sometimes you're overwhelmed right now, coming from the West, coming to the monastery, having to deal with Indian culture as well as Tibetan culture, as well as you've only been a monk for a few years. So you're still adapting to that. Like if you need to listen to the music for a half hour to just allow yourself a space to recharge, then do that. Now recognize that these worldly things that we do, they aren't the actual answer, right? They're a temporary band-aid. But if we need that to help encourage our practice, then we use it temporarily. And so I think we can do that with similar things like Netflix and things. I mean, I read quite a lot, you know. I every time I come to Bangalore, I head to the bookstores on Church Street and get a few more books. I think I have a dozen books I bought yesterday. Used books, but
What sort
still,
of books do you read?
I read everything.
Fiction as well?
Yeah, mostly fiction. I think this, we don't have time for this right now, but I think that some of the best ways we can gain insight about our mind is through reading fiction. I think nonfiction is useful and I enjoy it, but fiction gives you a chance to experience your own emotions and the way you understand the world in a way that nonfiction doesn't always do. So I read quite a lot, but that's a whole different topic.
And improves concentration.
It definitely improves concentration. Or it can also be like, I will say, like doing things like I know people that often use Netflix as like background so they can do like chores, right? So they turn on some TV show just to distract them while they do something else. So that I don't think is helpful because that's encouraging distraction, right? So if all you're doing is encouraging distraction, then that's not a useful way to use those things. But I think you can engage in worldly delights, quote unquote, the delights of samsara in a healthy way. They have to be careful. It's easy to be like, no, this is part of my spiritual practice and just making excuses for yourself. I'm really good at that as well. So we have to try not to do that. But I think you can incorporate them into your practice, especially when we're starting out and we're trying to find a balance. Okay, so okay. Let's do a quick meditation. So find a comfortable position where you feel stable. And maybe sitting cross-legged or sitting in a chair. Anyway, you want to feel like you are connected to the ground, that you're stable, that you are balanced. So whatever position works for you, adopt that now. Allow your spine and your back to be nice and straight, not curved over or sticking your chest out in any way. Let your hands either rest very gently where they naturally fall onto your thighs or your knees, or if you prefer, you can put them in the meditation mudra with your right hand on top of left, your thumbs just barely touching right at the center of your navel with your elbows out, whichever is more comfortable for you. Allow your head to rest on top of your spine, following the natural curve of your neck. So you're not tucking your chin in, but just letting it follow its natural shape. Allow your jaw to be nice and loose, not tight. It'll probably hang open slightly. That's okay. Let your tongue rest on the hard palate behind your teeth. And lastly, try to leave your eyes open or halfway open, with your gaze following the bridge of your nose to a space in front, not focused, but just not closing off reality either. And so even as we want to meditate on the six perfections, we'll start with the fifth. We'll start with concentration, and that will be our basis. So as you have adopted this posture, allow your breath to fall into its natural rhythm. Don't force it. And then allow your awareness to follow the breath. So as you breathe in, you can label that breathing in. And then as you breathe out, you can label that breathing out. And those labels are simply a tool to help you stay focused on the actual object, which is your breath. So let's do that for a few minutes rather. When you notice yourself distracted, either by a physical sensation, sight, smell, or a mental story that you're telling yourself, when you've lost your focus, just recognize that distraction, label it distraction, and then let it go. Don't judge it as being good or bad. Don't judge yourself as being good or bad for having it. Just recognize your awareness has drifted and then bring it back to the object of meditation, which in this case is our breath. And now that we have settled our mind and developed a taste of concentration, instead of focusing on your breath, I want you to focus on the perfection of generosity. The mind that says, I want to give away all of my possessions, all my roots of virtue, even my body. So as you breathe in, you can say to yourself, I am actively cultivating the mind that wishes and finds joy in giving to others. And focus on that quality, that mind. Reminding yourself of it as you breathe in. Without resentment or attachment, I'm willing to give away all of my wealth, my possessions, even my life, if it benefits others. Allow yourself to become comfortable with this perfected activity of generosity, even if it is not something you can practice immediately in your everyday life. Allow it to feel natural and comfortable in your meditation. The mind that wishes to give. And now let your mind focus on the practice of ethical discipline, the practice of avoiding non-virtue and pursuing virtuous activities. And as you breathe in, try to experience the mind that is always on guard to not follow non-virtue, but eagerly seeks out virtue for the benefit of others. And make strong commitment. I will avoid all non-virtuous behavior, and I will adopt all that is virtuous. And now let your mind turn to the practice of patience. Let yourself experience the mind that is willing to endure any type of suffering or harm without being disturbed. No matter what harm befalls me, be it natural or at the hands of another sentient being, I will not be upset or irritated or disturbed by them, but have patience in response to their harm. Cultivate this experience. Regardless of how others behave toward me, I will not allow a mind of anger to be generated and to overwhelm my mental or physical actions. And now turn to the practice of joyful effort. Develop the experience in the mind that is willing to seek out and endure suffering if it means it'll benefit other sentient beings. Develop a firm commitment. I am willing to endure any length of suffering if it means I'm able to be of service to others. And I will find joy in this practice of virtue. Now, briefly, let's turn our minds to the perfection of wisdom. So I'll recognize the true nature of reality, that nothing exists simply as it appears to me, but instead exists without any inherent existence, without any overlays of true existence. Everything is selfless. So try to develop a mind that is settled in the recognition that my experience of reality and the actual nature of reality are not the same thing. And I will then act on from a place of wisdom, not a place of hallucination. And lastly, turn your mind to the perfection of skillful means, the seventh perfection. Generate the recognition that I will analyze my resources, my abilities, my opportunities, and do the best with whatever resources I have to include all six perfections in my service to others. I'll be skillful in the way I employ my worldly and spiritual activities. And now, as you're ready, you can allow your awareness to return to the room. Thank you so much. So, as always, on my Sunday morning classes, I ran out of time. So that meditation, you can do much more elaborate. And so if any one of the perfections you think, just start with the perfection of generosity. Always you should start with concentration, right? Developing a sense of non-distraction. But then let's say you're focusing on generosity. You could spend a whole session on generosity. First, developing that mind that's committing itself to be a mind that wishes to give. And then actually try to see, what does that feel like? What is the experience of a mind that wishes to give? And then once you have that experiential kind of flavor, then so what would I do in this circumstance? Actually generate circumstances where you might be able to exercise that mind and focus on them and bring them into your meditation. So it's not just this abstract mind, I wish I could give to others, right? I'm happy giving to others, or I don't want to have resentment. I don't want to have attachment. It's not that. That is the place we start, but you can go much deeper if you want to spend time on it. So bring in these six perfections, or bring in a seventh of skillful means, is useful, and you can go much deeper into each of them and elaborate.
So it can involve the use of imagination. So you imagine situations where you're, for example, giving.
Exactly.
Or giving in different ways, maybe giving your time.
Yeah.
So you use the imagination.
Yeah. So part of what we're doing engaging in this type of meditation, which we call analytical meditation as opposed to stabilizing, is we are visualizing how we exist in the world and how these things, we're analyzing how they work in our minds, right? And in our practice. So that I will say the one thing before you start a practice like this, if you are going to do this level of kind of imagination work, as we can call it that, plan it beforehand, because you don't want it just to be a distraction. You're not just daydreaming, right? And there's a danger of just daydreaming if you don't have some focus and attention. So know that this is the practice I'm going to do. These are the steps that I want to go through. And especially if you're doing it on your own, maybe have a timer or something to make sure I'm going to do it for this long. And that way you don't let yourself get distracted into a daydream, because it's very easy to just, oh, this is nice. You know, and then all of a sudden you've been sitting there for 45 minutes and you haven't done anything except indulge in daydreams. But yes, that is a valid way. That's what we want to try to do, because then we want to make these experiences not just be something that feels right on this cushion, but is actually applied to our everyday life. So first we visualize, what would this look like in my real life? And then how can I actually go about doing that? So yeah, that is an important way to practice. But just want to, sure.
How is the 10th exalted wisdom different from the 6th wisdom of emptiness?
Sorry, I said I mentioned that. So in general, when we look at the wisdom of emptiness, the perfection of wisdom, the 6th one, it does have 3 types, which is the wisdom that realizes the nature of all reality, the wisdom that realizes conventional reality and how to distinguish conventional and ultimate, and then the wisdom that recognizes what are the best means to act for the benefit of sentient beings. So we say it is divided into 3. But the focus of it is the recognition of the nature of reality, so ultimate wisdom. And jnana, so in Sanskrit, it would be prajna is the 6th one, and jnana is the 10th one. So yeshe versus shut in Tibetan, yeshe being the 10th one. So the 10th one is focused on the different types of wisdom you accumulate as you progress on the path. So to some extent, these exalted wisdoms, we say there are exalted wisdoms that realize your past lives, wisdoms that are able to realize the minds of others. These kind of exalted types of super consciousnesses that you can develop, or other types of wisdom like the mirror-like wisdom, or the wisdom of individual actions and so forth. These different levels of realizations that are not focusing on the nature of reality, but are focusing on how you exist in the conventional world and how to use that to energize your path. So when you're including all 10, the 6th one is focusing on emptiness, so the nature of reality, and then anything outside of that, well, not just emptiness, but also distinguishing between conventional and ultimate reality. That's the focus of the 6th one. And then the other types of realization that you are developing and strengthening, those fall into the 10th category, because those are skillful ways to engage in the world.
What about the realization of subtle dependent arising?
So the realization of subtle dependent arising is going to be a realization of emptiness, because we say dependent arising or dependent origination, tendrel in Tibetan, is emptiness. That is an uncommon teaching of Tsongkhapa. Not everyone agrees with that. But we say the realization of dependent arising is the realization that nothing exists as it appears to us and is dependent on causes, conditions, as well as being merely labeled, merely imputed. So that is recognizing that is to recognize emptiness.
There's one other question.
Sure.
Here they're asking, the shamatha practice discussed today, is it the same as the one done as a precursor to the uncommon preliminary practice? And if yes, then a follow-up question is that can a practitioner perform shamatha vipassana together with the uncommon preliminary?
So yes, it's the same. So shamatha or shine in Tibetan, sometimes called combining, or there are a few other terms for it in English. It is a type of meditation that is developing single-pointed, uninterrupted, effortless concentration. So for any of the higher levels of practice or meditation, you want to start with a type of concentration. Most of us haven't achieved shamatha yet, but we still start with concentration and our own baby version of shamatha, right? Are working towards it. Vipassana or vipassana in Sanskrit is a type of wisdom. So shamatha is a type of concentration. If we look at the mental factor, it's a type of tingizin, type of concentration. Vipassana is a type of wisdom. And so when you develop concentration, that allows you to focus on a single object. And then that focus on that single object will eventually allow you to develop a wisdom that understands that object, right? And that is vipassana or vipassana. And so once you develop vipassana, it's always simultaneous with shamatha. They work together, okay? So we call them, in Tibetan, we say zumdrel. So they're inseparable in that way, or they're simultaneously practiced. And those serve as a basis for any future meditations you may do, whether it be the uncommon preliminaries or the common preliminaries, or any meditative practice, including all of the practices of Tantra and visualization, and all of the practices that are included in the Theravada scope or the small scope. Every practice is going to be benefit from having a basis of shamatha and then lakton of vipassana, lakton in Tibetan. So in that way, shamatha practice pervades all of our practice, or it can. And for those of us that haven't actually achieved shamatha yet, we still have to have concentration. Because if you don't have concentration, how can you try to do anything? You know, the meditations we did today, trying to bring up this idea of the 6 perfections, if you're constantly distracted, then you're not able to actually engage in that, right? So having concentration or shamatha as the basis is useful. Now, when you try to develop shamatha practice, or actually develop shamatha, we focus on the breath as our meditations here in class, because the breath is a natural object to focus on, and it's very easy for most people. It's also a neutral object. So ideally, in your daily practice, it's more beneficial to focus on a virtuous object, like a visualization of Shakyamuni Buddha, for instance. And you develop single-pointed concentration with regard to a virtuous object, because that makes your meditation more virtuous. But you can even focus on external objects. So the non-Buddhist practitioners will often focus on a rock or a stick. And it's much more difficult to focus on an object that isn't internal, but you can and still develop concentration based on that. So it really is just the act of developing a single pointed concentration, and it's neutral, right? It's then how we use that that matters. So then we use that for our subsequent practices, whatever they may be. Any other questions?
There are no more questions.
No more online? Any in person? Okay, so then maybe we will close. I was thinking when I was thinking of what I wanted to talk about today, I realized that in the last couple of weeks I've been talking a lot about what not to do, how to avoid non-virtue, which is important. But if you don't have the supplemental practices, then you are engaging in a spiritual path just by avoiding non-virtue. But we need to supplement it by doing things, right? We need to be proactive. And that activity, that proactive nature, is built in to avoiding non-virtue, but sometimes it isn't always expressed. And the practice of the perfections is a real way to understand it in a clear way. They work together. They're not two sides of the same coin. They're two different streams that are working together. But so I wanted to do a little bit of discussion today about what proactive ways we can exist in the world to engage in virtuous activity. But what's most important about all of these, right? These paramitas are activities in the world, yes, but they're minds. We are developing minds of these perfected activities of the Bodhisattvas. And these are what bring us closer and closer to Buddhahood, because these are the activities that are effortless for Bodhisattvas and for Buddhas. So for us, they require effort, but they are making our behavior in line with, or in concordance with, the goal, right? So we're looking at what we hope to achieve, and we're bringing that goal, that result, into our everyday life right now. And so that is the goal of, or the purpose of meditating on and practicing the 6 perfections, is to take the end result of the perfected activities of a bodhisattva or a Buddha and bring them into our everyday life, so that our behavior then parallels that and serves as conducive causes for us to achieve those high levels of realization and actually be beneficial in the world. So hopefully there was some benefit to studying these today. I tend to cram a lot on these Sunday teachings. I look at sometimes outlines of other teachers, and they would take 4 weeks to teach 6 perfections like this. And I try to cram it all into 2 hours. So I apologize for the overload, but hopefully there was some benefit. Let us try to make our practice virtuous in the end by dedicating any merit we've accumulated. So our practice was virtuous in the beginning by setting a strong intention that we're here together studying and practicing to benefit sentient beings. Our practice was virtuous in the middle by actually engaging in study of the Dharma, contemplation of the teachings of the Buddha, and how to apply them to our everyday lives, to make our worldly life and our spiritual life no longer two distinct things, but one continuous practice. And we make our practice virtuous in the end, sealing it by dedicating any merit we've accumulated so that we might quickly become Buddhas to benefit all sentient beings, to relieve the suffering of all sentient beings. And so we will do that. So generate a mind of dedication, a mind that wishes to give away your merit to others and wishes that it ripens in your own quick achievement of perfect, complete Buddhahood so that you might benefit others. And as you've generated that mind, we'll recite some dedication prayers on page 36 of our gold book. So we'll recite the first two verses in English, then we'll recite the second verse again in Tibetan, and then we'll offer the short long life prayer for His Holiness Dalai Lama. And due to the merits of these virtuous actions, may I quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha and lead all living beings without exception into that enlightened state. May the supreme jewel bodhicitta that is not arisen arise and grow. May that which has arisen not diminish, but increase more and more. Choe Sum Ling Ma Ke Panam Ke Gyoshi Ke Wanyam Pa Me Bayam Gone Gondu Pelwa Show. In the land encircled by snow mountains, you are the source of all happiness and good, all-powerful Chenrezig Tenzin Gyatso. Please remain until samsara ends. Thank you so much. Just a reminder that there is a puja happening this Wednesday for his Sakadawa Duchen. That is going to be at 6 p.m. Venerable Gacho will be leading it. Next weekend, Venerable Gacho will be here, both Saturday and Sunday. And the weekend after that, I'll be back. So we have in-person teachings for the next 2 weeks, and then there's a 1 week break, and then we start in-person teachings again. So that is all going to be posted on the schedule. If it hasn't already been posted, we'll be starting a new topic for our Saturday classes after the break. And so all that information is available. So I encourage all of you to continue to join us. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Happy Sakadawa to you.
Happy Sakadawa. Yes. I rejoice in all of our incredible merit from our practice and study together. So thank you. Thank you. Yes. Please enjoy tea, some fellowship to complement our spiritual practice. What's the dose? So 2 drops is a dose. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So it's 2 drops is the dose.
I see.
So I don't know the person brings.
I see. So it's more of a nerve base as opposed to like muscle base. Okay.
The points you get.
Yes, it is one more.
Yeah, yeah. I had my hand on the door. That's what I'm for.
But they believe about now. Don't actually not
Same goes to you. Figure out.
Yeah, no, I think about the book.
Thank you.
I'll remind you later, huh?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. That's very kind of you.